ahead, I think we should.
Okay.
We
Dr. Shri, we can start maybe.
have all the participants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's time 6.
We're 3 minutes past the time that we wanted to start.
Yes, it's 6:32. Hi, Songtar, are you there?
Yes. I am there.
Okay. No.
Can we keep all our mic muted so that we don't get disturbance?
Dr. Song, we can start the event, please.
Yes.
I think he is having some issues with his network. He is not online right now.
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
We could wait for another minute. Let's see, he will be joining back, and then we can
Yes.
start.
I think he's back. Yes.
Okay, I think we can start.
Okay.
Can you all see
Sure.
me?
Your video is off, Songtar.
My video is off.
Yeah.
Give me a second. My video is off. I thought I switched it on. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Now we can see you. You're still in your scrubs, it seems.
Yeah, I just came back from the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how many participants are there?
There are already 50.
40 participants and 11 in the panel. Like minus me and my team member, you all are 9 people in the panel, and we have 40 in the attendee list.
Okay, I think maybe we start. So we are live, right?
Yes, we are live.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this sleep apnea surgery webinar during COVID-19 pandemic. So we have within this talk 3 distinguished speakers, and of course my co-moderator, Professor Sandeep Bansal, who will moderate this session with me. And Professor Sandeep Bansal, of course, is from PGI Chandigarh and well known in the field of sleep apnea. And we have very interesting talk during this COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe before we start, we have some questions that we have prepared for the participants. So if you don't mind, when we post the question, just answer them on the screen. And then when the lecturers, speakers give their talk, then the questions will be reposted and see whether or not we have difference in, rather you gain knowledge from the talk for this interactive session. And of course, at the end, when we finish all the talks, we'll have some Q&A sessions. Okay, so maybe we can get Dr. Ashwina to pose the first question.
Yeah, maybe just a minute. I like before we start.
Okay, sorry. Maybe Sandeep say something. Yeah.
No. I just wanted to introduce our moderator first, Dr. Songtar To. He's the the head of the otolaryngology head neck surgery department at Singapore General Hospital, and he heads the Singduke NUC Sleep, and he's the director of the sleep center there. Very very humble and a nice human being, more than being an excellent surgeon. And I've spent time with him, and I can vouch for that. and his knowledge and his surgical skills for obstructive sleep apnea are all well known to all our panelists and to the world all over. And genuinely a very, very humble person. So it's really fun and nice to be always associated with him.
Thank you, Sandeep. So maybe let's start the ball rolling by having the poll, the questions that our panel, our speakers have prepared. We start with there's 6 questions, right? We have. Yep.
So Dr. Songta, all the questions are in between the sessions. So we can probably start with the session.
Okay, so we are not going to, okay, fine. Then I think maybe let's introduce the first speaker, Dr. Via Saga, who is the director of Saga ENT Head and Neck Center, and he completed his MS ENT at Madras Medical College with distinction and was awarded a gold medal, and did his fellowship in snoring and sleep apnea surgery at Chicago, USA under Prof. Michael Freeman, a well-known sleep surgeon. And of course, he subsequently did his fellowship in head and neck recon surgery at Indiana Hospital and a pediatric ENT fellowship at Wayne State University, USA. And he worked as an associate professor in ENT at NRI Medical College and is now a full-time practice in Saga ENT Head and Neck Center. So he has published many journals in peer-reviewed published many peer-reviewed journals and articles, as well as 2 book chapters, and has created an innovative tongue-based resection procedure for sleep apnea management. And of course, he's well known to us and as well as to the Indian surgeons for sleep apnea as the president of the Indian Association of Surgeons for Sleep Apnea. And I'd like to maybe get him to start the ball rolling by talking about sleep apnea practice in times of COVID. Saga, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Songta, for wonderful introduction. And let me start my presentation here. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So at the outset, I want to thank the organizers of this wonderful webinar, especially Dr. Sandeep Bansal and ResMed team. And on behalf of IASSA, we would like to welcome you all for this webinar in this difficult times of COVID era. And my topic is going to be the changes in sleep apnea practice during COVID-19. So COVID-19 has been one of the most devastating illness that is being present, especially for the ENT surgeons. It's not just for the surgeon. As a surgeon, we are getting affected. But if you think about the patient's perspective, it is even more dire. So the perspectives I will divide into 2. One is the patient perspective and the other one is the surgeon's perspective. See, normally these OSA patients, they're already obese, and during this COVID pandemic, there has been periods of lockdown. And because of this lockdown, the patient who is already having snoring and obstructive sleep apnea and who is kind of an obese patient is just restricted to his home and his TV, wherein he just becomes a couch potato. He starts to just binge eat, and because the gym and outdoor activities are prevented, there is less activity and he becomes even more obese, and there is a lot more obstruction that is happening and the disease worsens further and this becomes a vicious circle. And because of this, even if the patient wants to get an access for the treatment, there is limited access to the treating doctor. If not for the surgery, at least if we go for the CPAP also, first of all, we need to get a sleep study done, and lot many level 1 sleep labs are closed or not advised to do the sleep level 1 studies. And by chance they get the level 3 study, and if they are opted for treatment like a CPAP, even for renting a CPAP, it becomes an issue. As a patient, I would be worried whether the machine has been used by someone else, or if the renting machine, if it was having been contaminated by a virus or so on and so forth. And furthermore, the BiPAP, if the patient needs a BiPAP, the BiPAP cost has also skyrocketed during this pandemic. Coming to the surgeon's perspective, even though the disease itself is an emergency in terms of morbidity, but the sleep apnea surgery is considered as a non-emergency or an elective surgery. The evaluation of a sleep apnea patient itself involves examination of nose and throat, which itself are aerosol generating. Furthermore, doing a flexible laryngoscopy or a DISE again is a aerosol generating procedure. And as I had told you before, getting a sleep study, which is a mandatory for getting the diagnosis, has become a little more tough task, especially to get an in-lab sleep study. If you go on for a home-based sleep study, because many parts of the home-based system have become more disposable items, the cost of even getting a sleep study at home has become a little higher. The surgeries for sleep apnea is more often limited to the airway, and because it is airway, it is an aerosol generating procedure, and hence it needs a lot more threshold to undergo these surgeries, and it needs a lot more modifications. I think Dr. Srinivas will be mentioning about in the next webinar about that modifications. So coming to the guidelines, one of the good things that is available now is the guideline given by International Sleep Surgery Society. And that has come out with the guidelines for both adult and pediatric practice guidelines, and of which there is 3 objectives. The number 1 objective is to develop the criteria for high priority sleep surgery patients. Number 2 is to identify a temporizing management strategies like a CPAP or a weight reduction strategies, etc., for the patients awaiting for sleep surgery. And number 3 is to assess a relative safety and resource consumption of various surgical classes. I'm going to use this guideline in some of my talks, but many are also going to be our own innovativeness that we from IASSA have created. As in examining any other patients, patient with sleep apnea has to come with a triage, and the setup needs modification whenever we are examining a patient for OSA. The patient, when they come in, we obviously have a temperature check and a pulse ox check. And then the spacing needs to be given much importance in your OPD. Most importantly, the AC has to be put down and the ventilation ports has to be open, and the patient has to be having a mask or a visor, and there has to be adequate spacing between the patients during the CT, for which we give them adequate timings in the appointments when they schedule for the appointment. You can also see in the background that there has been some notifications about the COVID-19 and the practices that needs to be mandatory. Coming to the specifications of OSA, the most important thing is getting the questionnaire, especially the stop bank questionnaire and ESS. We try to use the help of the gadgets and to get its help to get the questionnaire done. But because of the varied type of the patient population that we cater in our city at least, this did not work out for us. And hence, what we went across is our nurse or the technician had to get his phone and they have to fill in by asking this question. And that's how we filled in this stop bank questionnaire and the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And majority of the times, the nurse also asks the salient complaints, history, occupation, where they're coming from, the travel history, their exposure to the COVID containment zones, etc. And then they come into our cubicle. Even our cubicle has been modified considerably with our innovativeness so that we can avoid use of the shield, and we have created a curtain, and this is the curtain that separates the physician from the patient side. There is a table fan and a pedestal fan on both sides, both on the patient side as well as on the physician side. And this curtain is also having a glove that is inbuilt, through which the surgeon can insert his hands and examine the patient if needed. After the history is taken up, which is the most mandatory one from the patient and from the attender, then the examination is done. Even for examination, we have modified our chamber in such a way that the curtain extends all the way from the roof to the floor, and there is a staff member with a complete PPE on the opposite side, and there is a pedestal fan in the patient side, and the patient is seated near to the most ventilated zone, and the air from the table fan actually blows the air out so that the aerosols get out, and there is also an exhaust fan within the chamber. The surgeon can insert his hands with the glove into the glove that is inserted in the curtain, and the surgeon can also examine the patient, and until the patient is examined, as to examine for the oral cavity, the mask has to be worn by the patient. Because it is a see-through curtain, there is no impedance for doing a thorough examination as we do for our routine ENT examination that we used to do regularly. And we encourage the use of the disposable tongue blades. And then we also do a pseudochem nasal examination and the ear examination that is needed. After the examination is done, the glove is completely desanitized with the hypochlorite solution. And you can see that we are also prepared the couch and the chairs with the disposable plastic sheets that can be disposed of at the end if there is any aerosol generation. If you look at the examining surgeon, he is with the full PPE and also with the shield goggle on the N95 mask, and this is how we have modified our examining chamber. But an examination for a sleep apnea doesn't end with just oral cavity examination and oropharyngeal examination. Many times we need to assess the patient for a static collapse and the dynamic examination, for which we need a basic of a flexible laryngeal examination, which are therefore are aerosol generating procedures for which we created these kind of cabins and chambers. And we also utilize the full face mask of the oxygen mask, which is covered by a glove or a tape, and there is a slit that is made, and this is worn by the patient, and they go to the second chamber that is also a completely protected chamber in terms of curtain, and this is this endoscopic system is also separated from the patient and examining surgeon. You can see that the patient is having a full face mask through which there is a slit through which the flexible scope goes in, and the surgeon is again with the full PPE kit, and the chamber is having a HEPA filter system, and even the suction machine is also having a HEPA filter inbuilt in it. The suction port outlet is actually outside this chamber, and with this endoscopy, the surgeon is able to assess for any static obstruction, or if there is any dynamic collapse, or if he wants to do a Muller's, he can do a Muller's, or if there is end expiratory pressure and assessment need to be done, it can be done. And with this, how we do our flexible endoscopy. and we jot down our findings. After the procedure, we do the fumigation. As of now, we were doing the fumigation with the bacillocid solution, which is virucidal against the coronaviruses also. And after the fumigation is done, our maid cleans the area. But what we found with the bacillocid and the fumigation is many of the iron materials that are there gets rusted, and hence we have ordered this fogging machine which uses the hydrogen peroxide, which is again virucidal against this COVID-19 virus. We are yet to use this. We have placed the order, and once I use it, I'll give the comments on that as well. The flexible endoscope system, and the endoscope goes in for the Cydex sterilization as per the protocol, which we have been practicing before. And this is just a clinical examination. But to confirm sleep apnea, you need a sleep study. Because we no longer do the in-lab sleep level 1 studies, we have promoted more of the home-based level 3 studies. And even with the level 3 studies, there is a chance that the sleep lab system can get contaminated with the virus particles or the fomites. So hence what the technician does is, he takes a plastic roll and he encircles the sleep lab system. And this nasal cannula gets disposed of after each use, and this gets sterilized again. And this is how the sleep lab is being used in our setup. And I think Dr. Dipankar Datta will be talking in detail about the CPAP titration in his next talk. And Dr. Vijay Krishnan will be talking about the sleep study subsequent to my talk. So we no longer do the in-lab sleep lab CPAP titration, and we follow the auto CPAP titration with the disposable masks. And again, I think Dr. Vijay and Dipankar will be talking about it. And based on the CPAP titration that is generated by this auto CPAP, either by 2 or 3 studies, we then come to a conclusion, and we then suggest for a CPAP usage for these patients who have been diagnosed with sleep study. Our threshold for giving a CPAP has been the lowest in this era because we don't want to jump in for surgery as the first role. Even for the most deserving patients, we try a CPAP trial, and only if the patient cannot tolerate the CPAP, then we think of the alternatives. And that's when our guidelines that I had shown you before comes into our help. Again, in this guideline, you can see that we need to identify the temporary management strategies for the patient awaiting for the sleep surgery. The number 1 recommendation is to encourage the use of PAP, and also to consider PAP desensitization for the patients with the history of intolerance. We obviously try to encourage the use of mandibular repositioning device, but unfortunately the dental surgeon who used to make this mandibular repositioning device, he himself got COVID, so we were left out of this mandibular repositioning device in our practice now, and we are going back to our positional therapy, and more emphasis have been given to the behavioral modification. I think Dr. Nancy will be talking about it after Vijay, and more importance has been given to maximizing the medical management for the nasal obstruction form of nasal sprays, antihistamines, and immunotherapy. And the role of surgery comes as very, very selective cases. In whole of this pandemic, in the 4-5 months, we have done only a handful of surgeries for OSA. That too, most of them have been limited to the nasal surgery. And as per the protocol, we, at least me, have been doing the nasal surgery in the view of maximizing the CPAP adherence for the patient post nasal surgery, so that it will facilitate the use of CPAP for this patient. In the patients with the static obstructions, again, like polyps or turbinate hypertrophy or nasopharyngeal lesions, then we would consider a nasal surgery. And coming to the pharyngeal surgery, as you see in the guidelines, the lower pharyngeal surgeries, especially the tongue-based surgeries, are associated with high or greater potential for acute or postoperative care, and there is a lot more chance of contamination with the lower pharyngeal surgeries, and hence we had limited the number of pharyngeal surgeries in our practice. We had hardly done maybe 2 or 3 pharyngeal surgeries, and that too with the very grossly enlarged tonsils or lingual tonsil patients. And coming to the laryngeal surgery, supraglottoplasty as the primary modality in the infants with the laryngomalacia. We have done one patient with the pediatric OSF for whom we did a supraglottoplasty, and we use more often the cold instrument as suggested in the guidelines, and we try to avoid the powered instrumentation as suggested in the guidelines. The hypoglossal nerve stimulation is not available in India, so we don't have the access to it, and we don't do that many skeletal surgeries and tracheostomies in this pandemic as well. And this is a Shishi chart which says what is the risk of transmission during this type of procedures and the resource consumption risk that is given in the guideline. You can see it there. So now let's go on with this short information. Let's go on to this scenario. Just listen to the scenario because my poll question is going to be based on this. Hello, Sandeep. Hello. Hello. Hello, Sandeep. Hello. Yeah. So a 32-year-old male patient with a nasal obstruction with severe snoring, choking spell, and right nasal obstruction was not responding to medical management has come to us. On examination, we find an antropenal polyp on the right side, and this is the tonsil size, and BMI is 31. In sleep study, level 3 sleep study shows an apnea-hypopnea index of 69. LSAT is 71, snoring index is 4000 and above, and the heart rate is 159. He has failed with the CPAP trial and also with the maximum medical management. This is a patient wherein we did a PPE DISE with the full protection. We did a drug-induced sleep endoscopy. The drug-induced sleep endoscopy protocol is as similar to what we did, we talked about in the previous IAS webinar, but here we take all the precautions with the full face mask, and we can see in this particular patient that there is a large antropenal polyp that's obstructing on the right side, and that is going to the choana and causing the obstruction. And as we go down, you can see that there is also circumferential collapse at the level of the velopharynx, and there is also a prominent tongue base in form of lymphoid tongue base, and there is also a level 1 primary epiglottic collapse. We did a interventional DISE on this patient, wherein we insert a nasopharyngeal airway, and then we pass the airway distal to the obstruction, that is the velopharyngeal collapse, to see that if there is the persistence of the epiglottic collapse. And this particular patient, you can see that there is a grade 1 epiglottic collapse that is there in this particular patient. And this tells that in spite of your intervention that you can give in the level of the palate, there is going to be epiglottic collapse. So this is the call. I think, should I stop sharing, Nancy, or can I continue my sharing? Yeah. Based on this case scenario explained, how would you manage this patient? Would you force him to go for CPAP? Or would you force him to go for steroids? Would you go for polypectomy followed by CPAP? Or would you just go on like usual, go for a complete multi-level surgery, including a polypectomy, and get done with this patient? What would you do?
Requesting all the audience members to cast in your polls, including the panelists. We have 70 participants. So we'll just give it another 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Around 25% have voted now.
Very good.
doctors requesting your vote, you will be able to see which side most of the doctors are swinging in terms of this case. I hope the polling is not too difficult. You just have to click on the option that you are wanting to go with.
Yeah, I think we can stop
Sure.
the.
So I'm ending the polling and I'll be sharing the results for you, Dr. Sagar.
Okay.
So,
So that is the result.
yes. And I think I also went ahead with the polls result that 55% have opted for polypectomy and followed by CPAP. And that's exactly what I did for this patient. And the patient was doing fine in the postoperative period with the CPAP follow-ons. And as a protocol, not for this patient, but for any other patient who is planned for a surgery, we do a CTPNS with OSA protocol. And when the patient goes for a OSA protocol, we also get a HRCT test. And it is mandatory to get a COVID testing, either in form of RT-PCR or at least along with the HRCT test, or at least an antigen or an antibody test. We insist on getting a negative pressure OT with the HEPA filters, and we advise to limit the personnel in the OT. We advise the fumigation before and after, and we used to advise strongly on disposable circuits and tubing. And most of the surgeries, we ended up using only the cold steel technique. And the microdebrider is one such tool which has been advised in many of the articles, that it says that because of its low powered tool and due to the relative low speed of rotation in comparison to the drill, this has been considered as a low aerosol generating device. In contrast to
Sagar?
Yeah.
We should be winding up this.
Yeah. Just last two slides, that's it.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
So I think the more of this is going to be spoken by Dr. Srinivas Kishore in his next webinar. So if at all you as surgeons, if you want to see what are the instruments that needs to be used, I would advise you to go through this article, which tells what the instruments can be used in our OT. And this is another article that I would advise you, which we followed it to create our drapes for doing the nasal surgeries, wherein we used more of traditional cold steel instruments, and like in form of septoplasty or in terms of turbinate reduction, wherein we use more of the cold steel technique. And you can see that after the surgery, the patient's healing has been good with just regular cold steel septoplasty and turbinoplasty, that we can do it without the use of the power generating tools. And the post-op is also very key to have a very good ICU care, and it is always imperative to get a CPAP machine of the patient to bring it in the post-operative period. And the care needs to be taken even during the pack removal and in the follow-up. The patient should be advised to go for CPAP for the correction of the lower level collapses. To conclude, OSA practice in COVID era is a challenge both for the patients as for the surgeons. Precautions needs to be taken both during the evaluation as well as during the management. Consideration should be given for lifestyle modifications and for the non-surgical treatment options first, unless otherwise indicated. And during surgery also, precautions are to be taken as I have advised. Thank you very much for this opportunity. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
We will take all the questions during the discussion time, Dr. Sagar, if that's fine.
Yep. I think we'll take the question at the end. So maybe in the interest of time, let me introduce the next speaker, Dr. Vijaya Krishnan, who is the head of Department of Snoring and Sleep Disorder, Madras ENT Research Foundation, Chennai, and also the founding secretary of the Indian Association for Surgeons for Sleep Apnea, in the Indian Academy of Otorhinolaryngology, Head and Neck. And he's been involved in multiple scientific advisory committee, including that for World Sleep Society, and has many publications in major ENT journals in India as well as internationally, and of course editorial board review for various international journals. So let's welcome Dr. Wijaya to give us a talk on polysomnogram from the ENT perspective. And again, I'd like to emphasize, please take note of the time, 20 minutes. So without further ado, Wijaya, all yours.
Thank you very much for your kind words. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Sandeep and the RESMA team for arranging this wonderful session on holistic management on COVID pandemic situation. So without wasting further time, we all know OSA is a common disease of both adult and pediatric age group with myriad of presentation. It is a spectrum of disorder and it's a metabolic syndrome. As like we are really crippled with this pandemic because of this COVID coronavirus. So just 3 days back, this is a scenario of India where almost more than half the country is severely debilitated by this condition, and we are just moving towards the peak. So before starting my talk, can you pose this question? What's the status of sleep study during COVID-19 in this pandemic situation? So what do you think? It should be a non-essential service or an essential service? What do you think of? It should be an...
Request audience only to answer the first poll. But nonetheless, I'll be launching the second poll later on too. Please, I repeat, please answer only the first poll.
So what's the status? What do you think? Should we consider sleep study as a non-essential or a semi-urgent or a non-urgent or an urgent and this essential?
Fine. So I will end the polling right now.
Yeah, almost the answers. Yeah. Many felt that it is essential, but unfortunately, can you? Okay, so unfortunately, the sleep services are assigned as non-essential status during COVID-19, and AASM, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, also urges the clinicians to continue postponing non-urgent care until date where the situation about corona settles. At the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that sleep is more important, especially during this pandemic situation, and we have to protect the health of the population, and we have to find some way to continue the practice of sleep medicine to treat these patients. As we all know, OSA contributes to the comorbid situation, comorbid conditions like cardiovascular, metabolic, neurocognitive. It disturbs the entire system of our body. We all know that. So in fact, all these comorbid conditions will complicate the current situation of COVID also. So we cannot ignore this condition without treating. Otherwise, it may end up in severe debilitating factor in COVID patients. So the most important and the one which I presently consider diagnosed on the basis of clinical findings without performing PSG or home sleep testing is questionable. So teleconsultation is most important in this scenario, especially before doing a PSG, to see which patient you are going to choose for further evaluation. So selecting the patient, and that gives you a face-to-face interaction, and especially in the presence of spouse or any other family member will help you to choose the patient. few may need a physical examination and further investigation. So that may not be further taken up forward with the teleconsultation. But certainly many people can be consulted, and we can suggest them what to do next. And a few may need intervention also. That also will be talked and discussed later. Most important aspect of teleconsultation is to have to encourage the patient to share the details about the clinical history. You can have a questionnaire before going into teleconsultation, before video chatting. You have to give them what are the clinical symptoms they are suffering from, and you can ask them to share their sleep diary, how they are feeling, previous reports, and a short clinical questionnaire. As I told you, a short clinical questionnaire you can prepare, and you can share with them to share their issues, and video recording of the sleep. PAP use, if the patient is already using CPAP, you can ask them to share their usage reports, and maintaining and documentation of all this data is very important when you are doing a teleconsultation. I'm sure most of us would be having a less number of patients when we are practicing. When we are not practicing or treating COVID patients, we'll be having more time, and we will be able to spend little more time with this teleconsultation. And as I told you, ethical issues are very important, and you have to ensure confidentiality when you are doing a teleconsultation, and the explicit consent for video consultation recording is also mandatory. So what are the guidelines for conducting sleep study? Sleep study, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, be conducted in the laboratory or at home. Both options are there. So depending upon the level of community spread in your place, you have to choose whether you are going to do it as a laboratory procedure or at home, or you are going to abandon the procedure. So in situations where there is severe community spread, you may have to postpone or reschedule in laboratory as well as home sleep test. In severe community spread. At the same time, moderate community spread, you can postpone or reschedule the in-laboratory PAP therapy, but visitors should be limited, and if they are necessary for patient care, they should be pre-screened like any other patient entering into your sleep lab or to your clinic. In places where there is a minimal community spread, in laboratory administration for diagnostic PAP can be done, diagnostic PSG can be done for children and adults, as well as supervised manual PAP titration can be resumed. So most of the situations depends upon the community spread of your practice in place. Healthcare, the next thing is screening healthcare personnel and the patient. So healthcare personnel, sleep technologists, your receptionist, everybody should be screened daily for COVID-19 symptoms. Daily, that is more important. And cough, fever, chest pain, etc., etc. A daily logarithmic of your findings should be maintained for all staff members. If anyone found anything different from the routine with the cough or chest pain or mild temperature, you may have to ask them to further investigate or evaluate for COVID. So above mentioned people, as I told you, should be quarantined and has to be treated like an asymptomatic patient or asymptomatic patient according to the COVID guidelines. So proper guidelines should be followed based on the results of the COVID-19 testing for your healthcare personnel. For patients, all the patients must be screened for potential symptoms. You have to think that they are potential carriers of coronavirus, and you have to treat like that. If possible, if it is feasible, in many places in India, initially we were not able to do COVID test. But if possible and feasible, if you can do a COVID-19 infection test, it is advisable to do the test. At least if there is a chance of positivity, then 2 negative results 24 hours apart has to be there. Or a suspected positive case record COVID-19 testing which must show a negative result. And all other cases can be scheduled for sleep study. As I told you, safe practice is the priority for both patient and healthcare personnel. So proper personal protective equipment, gloves, mask, face shield, etc., to gown, everything has to be given to your healthcare personnel, sleep technologist, especially during hooking up and hooking off of the patient. And the sterilization or disinfection of the reusable parts of the equipment, sleep lab, should be taken care. Hand washing is advised before and after removing PPE. This is very important, especially sleep technicians may not be as good as your other staff in the theater OT staff or in the hospital nursing staff. So you have to train them again and again, and you have to make sure they do all these procedures properly before starting or resuming your sleep lab. So hand sanitizer, and we always say there should be a maintenance of 6 feet distance, but it is very difficult, especially when the patient is being connecting a sleep lab. So it is very difficult. So technology should wear a glove while touching the patient, and they should change the glove. Each and every point we may have to insist to the technology so that cross-contamination can be avoided. As I told you, sanitization of all the equipment should be ensured. We can use isopropyl alcohol, 70% isopropyl alcohol or a quaternary ammonium component to clean all the equipment. If possible, wherever possible, you can use a reusable, or wherever possible, you can use a disposable consumables so that you can avoid the contamination to the next patient. For level 1 sleep study, you may have to sanitize the entire room, and the bed linen must be changed. And when you are using a titration, the mask can be disinfected at 70 degrees Celsius for 100 minutes, more than 3 hours or more than 1.5 hours. If you ask me what is the right disinfectant for this coronavirus, there is no approved official disinfectant. As I told you, 70% isopropyl alcohol is advisable and preferable. Wherever preferable, you can use a disposable device. And if you are going to reuse the lab or the equipment, you should use it only after 72 hours of disinfection. As I told you, if you have one room for sleep lab, if you have done a sleep study on the night, almost after 3 days, only you can put other patient into that lab. This is the recommended one. Maybe you should have 2 to 3 sleep labs and CPAP machines so that you can use it in a rotation basis. So the next thing which I want to emphasize on, choice of sleep study, whether you are going to do a home-based study or an in-lab PSG. So in a medically uncomplicated adult patient with high pretest probability of moderate to severe OSA, you can do a home-based sleep study. So, and you have to make sure there is no comorbidities, and they should not be used for general screening and pediatric age group patients or younger than 18 years of age. In-lab attended PSG is recommended, and because it is temporarily suspended in many centers, but when we will do, patient has comorbid cardiopulmonary disease, or patient has history of stroke, chronic opioid usage, or other unsafe medical condition, or other sleep disorders being thought of, then in-lab PSG is being done. So for evaluation of complex NREM, as I told you, other sleep disorders or epilepsy monitoring, REM sleep behavior disorder, all this can be picked up only during this in lab PSG. So the next question comes here. Can we treat OSA patient without doing a CPAP titration during COVID-19? Just give 30 seconds. I think should be sufficient. Can we treat OSA patient without PAP titration in this COVID pandemic situation? Yes or no? So it is going almost 50-50.
So we have 10 more seconds for 30 seconds.
Yeah. So the main answer is no.
30-second mark has
Yeah.
been hit, sir. I'll end the polling. We have 50%. I'm sharing the results for your.
Yeah, you can see. So almost 60% has said no. But again, we can. I'll tell you. I'll talk. So in lab PAP titration study, only in emergency cases is being done. Not everybody is undergoing titration studies. Yes, we have to make sure that it is COVID negative, and technology should wear a PPE, proper PPE. Appropriate air filters should be fixed to the AC unit if it is a centralized or a single unit, and viral filters to be fit to the PAP outlet. And as I told you, one case should be done in 72 hours. So can be safely practiced in negative pressure room, which is available in many higher centers. Home PAP trial is also available. It also to be done only in emergency cases or selective cases, and patient can be started using CPAP without a trial. This is a recommendation by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Patient can be started with auto CPAP without a trial if you think if they are not going to have difficulty if there is no much of comorbidity. Follow up the patient regularly via technical sedation daily till you see the comfortable CPAP usage report via softwares. So appropriate air filter also to be fitted in their air conditioning unit even at home. So the recommendation, or to conclude, avoiding or minimizing doctor to patient contact is a must, and it is possible when we are managing a OSA patient, and with a teleconsultation or other mode of audio visuals. Follow personal protective guidelines as well as social distancing, which is a general rule in managing in this situation, COVID situation. Home sleep testing and titration is preferred, but we can prescribe auto CPAP without doing a CPAP trial. High clinical risk patients may be diagnosed on the basis of clinical findings and without performing PSG or home sleep testing. So as I told you, if you think of general safety measures, like reduce the waiting time for the patient in your clinic, restrict patient attendance in PSG when you are doing in-lab PSG, social distancing and wearing mask, hand sanitizing, educational materials should be done in your sleep clinic to create awareness. Safety of the patient and the healthcare personnel is important. Choosing the level of sleep study must be clear by now. And disinfection of the device and the sleep lab is very important. And the recommended one is 70% isopropyl alcohol. In-lab or home PAP titration can also be done in selective patients. Other modalities of therapy should be thought of wherever possible. But information regarding this COVID-19 is still evolving and may necessitate modifications of the recommendations from time to time, place to place. So I would acknowledge here the guidelines set up by the Indian Society of Sleep Research, ISSR, for practicing sleep medicine during COVID-19 is also there. You can download and read about it to have more details. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Vijaya, for the very informative talk, and I'm sure our participants will has learned quite a lot from this. So we'll take the answers, or rather question and answer at the end, and I will introduce the next speaker, Dr. Nancy Shani, who is no stranger to management of sleep apnea. She's a dietitian by training and has written a lot of publication on the diet as well as sleep apnea, and has mentored many dietitian as well as PhD students. So I think let's welcome Dr. Nancy Shani to talk to us about behavioral treatment for sleep apnea. Dr. Nancy?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Songthar, and thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity to present my topic on lifestyle modifications in sleep apnea in COVID times. Okay. Now, it is critical for us to have a healthy diet so as not to gain weight, as obesity has a direct relation to OSA. Everybody is well aware of this. So let's see, why is it so important to understand the relationship between obesity, OSA, and its effect on patients having COVID, so that we can bring about lifestyle modifications which are really needed. If we are ourselves not convinced, we can never convince our patients. Hence, the first 5 minutes to understand why do we need to bring about these lifestyle changes. Now, COVID-19 is...
sorry to interrupt. Can you just put your presentation on a slideshow mode?
Okay, I'll just...
Yeah. Slideshow mode, please.
Slideshow, okay, fine. Is it okay?
No.
What I would suggest is you stop your share, and again when you click on share, you click on Screen.
Screen. Yeah.
Okay.
You stop your sharing first.
You'll find the button usually on the top to stop share. Or I can stop it for
Okay,
you.
okay.
Yeah,
I've stopped it. Yeah, I've stopped it.
Again, when you click on share,
Okay.
click on screen. The first option.
Start sharing, please.
Yeah. And if you can, yeah, just
Yes,
click on
yes,
that button.
yes, on that, yes.
Is it okay?
No. On
Give
this.
a moment. It might just change now. No, ma'am. It hasn't.
Please.
If you could just try one more time. Yeah, share screen and then. Yeah,
Yes.
perfect.
That's perfect. Yeah.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
Okay. So I'll again see, COVID-19 is an acute infectious respiratory disease that has posed critical challenges for the global healthcare community. The lockdown on outdoor activities inevitably disrupted the daily routine of people, including regular physical activity and dietary habits. This increased the risk of major weight gain for adults and children, especially of those already prone to gaining weight. First of all, we need to see what effect obesity has on OSA, and then we will see how it has changed further in this pandemic. I can't move the slide now.
Just click the page down button. Or the arrow button.
Yeah.
Obesity is the most powerful and essentially the only reversible risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea. You see, total body weight, BMI, and fat distribution all correlate with odds of having OSA. Every 10 kg increase in weight increases risk by 2 times, and every increase in BMI by 6, or every increase in waist or hip circumference by 13 to 15 centimeters increases the risk of having OSA by 4 times. Now, how is obesity as a structural, how it is related as a structural risk factor for OSA? Now, obese people, everybody is well aware of here, they have extrinsic narrowing of the area surrounding collapsible regions of the pharynx and regional soft tissue enlargement. So there are increased fat deposits at the level of the soft palate. In the soft palate and in submental area, they further narrow down the airways, which are more easily collapsible and prone to airway occlusion. So snoring, it leads to a vicious cycle of disturbed sleep, calorie cravings, lethargy, diminished physical activity, and further gain in body weight, accentuating OSA, and which can further lead to its comorbidities such as arterial hypertension, myocardial infarction, cerebral stroke, depression, anxiety, etc. So bidirectional may be the best way to describe the relationship between obesity and OSA. Now, how can dietary weight loss help? In obese patients, even minimal weight loss can be beneficial. It's thought to be related to preferential loss of visceral fat first, as opposed to subcutaneous fat, which has metabolic advantages. Weight loss reduces upper airway collapse by modifying the anatomy and function. This study states that weight reduction as a treatment of OSA is still underrated by many clinicians. Based on current knowledge, clinicians should revise their previous attitudes, including suspicions about weight reduction as an effective treatment for OSA patients. This was, about obesity and OSA. And now let's see the relationship between OSA, obesity, and COVID. Though the data is still coming in, but there are a few studies who have shown that how the pandemic has influenced obesity and its consequences. Now, this study from Italy on children concludes that recognizing these adverse collateral effects of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic lockdown is critical in avoiding depreciation of weight control efforts amongst youth afflicted with excess adiposity. Another study on quarantine during COVID-19 outbreak concludes that quarantine carries some long-term effects on cardiovascular diseases, mainly related to unhealthy lifestyle and anxiety. In this study on potential influences of OSA and obesity on COVID-19 severity, it found that obesity was a risk factor for invasive mechanical ventilation. OSA, particularly with concurrent obesity, could potentially contribute to worsening hypoxemia and the cytokine storm that occurs in COVID patients. In this study, an OSA as a probable risk factor for severe COVID-19, it stated that there are mechanistic links between OSA and COVID-19 severity, and severe COVID-19 and OSA share common risk factors, as already I mentioned. Here, obesity as a risk factor for poor outcomes in COVID-19 induced lung injury. It concludes that obesity is highly correlated with the presence of OSA, and patients with OSA are at increased risk for pneumonia in general, supporting hypothesis that OSA is an additional risk for development of severe diseases in patients with COVID-19. Here, this study in 2020, of course, pandemic was in 2020, so all studies in 2020, obesity is associated with inflammation and severe airway obstruction in patients with respiratory tract infections. Pediatric obesity is an independent risk factor for severity and morbidity amongst children with lower respiratory tract infections. Lockdowns may worsen not only the weight, but also the eating habits of children, since homes are likely stocked with ultra-processed and calorie-dense comfort foods, and all these foods are pro-inflammatory. Good nutrition is very important before, during, and after an infection. Although COVID-19 infection cannot be prevented by any food or dietary supplements, maintaining a healthy diet is an important part of supporting a strong immune system. It's like having a good security system of your home against natural and man-made invasions. It's immunity. Now, how to manage your weight? There has to be a calorie deficit to lose weight and calorie expenditure as well. To lose about half kg weight in a week, one needs to cut out theoretically on 550 kilocalories per day. So diet plus exercise is most effective method of weight loss recommended. Exercise alone probably does not work that well if diet is not in place. Diet and exercise as well as diet alone are good weight loss techniques. The basic mandate remains the same, COVID or no COVID. Alcohol intake, it's very important to see the amount of alcohol intake. Physical activity, inactivity history, it actually objectifies the time, the quality time and the quantity time spent on physical activity, as well as objectifies the time spent on sedentary activity throughout the day. Now, while assessing the dietary history, quite a few food perceptions of obese OSA patients surfaced, which ultimately in the end helped us to make the patients understand the basics of nutrition and make them aware and more knowledgeable. You see, like so many patients had this high fiber biscuits as packet full of snacks, considering it to be healthy. In fact, they didn't even consider it necessary to even mention it that they had, because they thought maybe it's calorie free because it is written high fiber and healthy. 36% patients considered fresh juice to be healthier options over fresh fruits, whereas vice versa is true. 73% patients considered refined or olive oil to have fewer calories than animal fat. So you can go rampant in frying in olive oil and all. Many patients were under perception that sugar-free sweets were healthy, and they hence indulged without even thinking that they were full of fat. And only 3.9% of patients related obesity as being the active cause of OSA. Now, dietary modification, the first and foremost thing, as already mentioned, is that show the patient the category they are in the BMI chart. They should know whether we are obese, overweight, what is the category of obesity. Take a diet history. Food diaries can be given at this time. Start with realistic targets. It's very important according to patient's dietary lifestyle. Suggest small, frequent meals, not more than 20 to 25 kilocalories per kg body weight. Help to choose foods with higher specific dynamic action. Now, the higher SDA foods are good quality proteins and complex carbohydrates, whereas simple carbohydrates and fats have very low SDA. Aim for leptin-inducing and ghrelin-suppressing foods. Avoid inflammatory foods like sugary drinks, trans fats, high fructose corn syrups. One has to be very, very careful while seeing the labels on the packed foods. And sugar sweetened drinks, as these can impair ghrelin response after the meal. Eating right with optimum calories from each macronutrient is very important. Like 50 to 60% of calories should come from carbohydrates from complex sources, 15 to 20% should come from proteins, and rest should come from good fats. And this actually helps a lot in improving the basic metabolic rate. Approximately 10% of calories are gained, 10% more of energy is gained from the processed refined foods as compared to the whole grain foods having the same amount of calories. So avoid these foods to avoid having sluggish metabolism. Encourage mindful eating. This is very important. It uses the ancient art of mindfulness, or being present emotionally and mentally. It is developing a new mindset around food. It's not a diet. It's being more attentive and aware in all aspects of your life. Like, why am I eating? When am I eating? What am I eating? How am I eating? Am I in a rush, or what state of mind am I eating? How much am I eating? Am I aware? And where do I invest my energy? Actually, it plugs you back into your body's cues, so you know when to stop or start eating. This study on dietary modifications has an outcome that after adhering to dietary modifications for 3 months, the patient no longer required the use of CPAP device and continues to have a normal active lifestyle almost 7 years later. The second aspect of lifestyle modification is physical activity. Now, the more muscle you have, the more calories you burn. The more fat you have, lesser is the number of calories you burn. And exercise definitely improves your metabolism. Take a physical activity inactivity history, as already mentioned. Start with small, regular, planned bouts of physical activity and then build up to the target over time. And in COVID times, it's very important, extremely important, to reduce sedentary behavior like TV viewing, computers, mobiles, video games, etc. And in lockdown, one can always choose fun types of physical activities like walk on the spot, do stretching, skip, jog in the lawn, up and down the home stairs, or children can help the parents in household walk around in the house with the pets, a musical party, for all the fun exercise part, annual races, obstacle races along with the kids. So it can be fun as well as exercise. Let me just enumerate a few studies which show the effect of weight loss on sleep apnea, which can in turn be extrapolated to have a even more beneficial effect during COVID times. Now, this study summarizes that losing weight is perhaps the single most effective way to reduce OSA symptoms and associated disorders. Now, the study on effect of weight loss on OSA amongst obese patients with type 2 diabetes concludes that physicians and their patients can expect that weight loss will result in significant and clinically relevant improvements in OSA. This is another study. It states that amongst obese adults with type 2 diabetes and OSA, intensive lifestyle intervention produced greater reductions in weight and apnea-hypopnea index over a 4-year period than did diabetes support and education alone. Now, this study, role of immune system in pathomechanism of obstructive sleep apnea, it states that immune system plays an essential role in pathomechanism of obstructive sleep apnea in development of certain OSA complications, like the increased risk of cardiovascular diseases. We have discussed the interplay between obesity, OSA, and COVID, and how and why it is important to make these lifestyle changes to take care of all three. Now, going a bit further, apart from oxygen saturation and symptom monitoring and giving paracetamol if fever, let's take a look at the routine treatment for asymptomatic but COVID positive or a patient with mild symptoms. Now, first and foremost comes adequate hydration, maybe supplementation with vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin D, trace elements like zinc, good protein diet, adequate sleep, and immunoboosters like natural herbs and spices. To nutritionally build up a strong immunity, we can include the following foods, which I'm going to mention in the next few slides, as part of our dietary routine, which will take care of patient's weight as well as boost up his immune system naturally, thus taking care of obesity, OSA during this COVID. First and foremost is hydration. Hydration helps to relieve congestion and flushing of toxins and maintaining the mucous membrane of the nose and upper respiratory tract. So one can hydrate with plain water, coconut water, lemon water, green tea, or infused water, soups, buttermilk, or milk. Then proteins play a very important role in body's healing and recovery. Sources can be soy proteins and nuts and seeds and beans and pulses. They're all plant sources. And animal sources can be, eggs and poultry, lean meats, milk and milk products. Omega-3 fatty acids enhances the function of immune cells. All these seeds like chia seeds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, and certain types of fish, they're rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin A protects by keeping skin and tissues in mouth, stomach, intestines, and respiratory system healthy. All yellow, green, and orange vegetables and fruits are rich in beta-carotene. Now, vitamin D and E have antimicrobial and antioxidant properties respectively. Vitamin D, also called as sunshine vitamin, promotes healthy gut microbiota, whereas vitamin E helps in modulating the host immune response in elderly. Vitamin B6 and B9 possess cytotoxic activity, aid in antibody production as well as response to antigens, boosts up metabolism. Vitamin B12 enhances gut microbiota, T cell production. It's an immunomodulator and aids in intestinal immune regulation, whereas vitamin C stimulates antibody formation and supports cellular functions. Both prebiotics and probiotics help to reinforce immune system, increase immune response, and promote specific immune signaling. After mentioning few vitamins as immunity boosters, here are important trace elements like zinc and selenium and magnesium, which are although required in small amounts by our body, but are important antioxidants which alter host response to viral infection and play a vital role in innate as well as acquired immunity by boosting immunoglobulins. Our home kitchen, especially in India, is literally a nutraceutical factory. Almost all the herbs and spices like ginger, basil, neem, turmeric, garlic, mint, onion seeds, cumin, cinnamon, pepper, cloves, fenugreek, to name a few, are immunoboosters, since they possess antimicrobial as well as antiviral activities which help fight infection. But these spices and herbs should be taken within limit, because some spices may increase acid secretion and may cause damage to the inner layer of the stomach. So including optimum amounts of all the food groups in daily diet will not only help an obese OSA patient to lose weight in a healthy, scientific way, as well as a tasty way, of course, but also aid in enhancing his body's immune response to fight the pathogens. It's not difficult to bring a healthy, positive change in one's lifestyle. The only requirement is awareness and knowledge about what is healthy and how to incorporate it according to underlying medical conditions, and ultimately make it a behavioral change. To summarize, OSA with obesity is a lethal combination to fuel COVID-19 and keep it burning. In times of pandemic like this, all preventive and supporting curative measures leading to maintenance of optimum BMI, balanced nutritional status, strong immunity through natural means of a healthy diet, and other lifestyle modifications such as physical activity is the need of the hour. Management definitely begins with patient education. It has to be taken as a behavioral therapy. Any extremes like very low carb diet or very high protein diet should be avoided. Adding anti-inflammatory foods will not only boost up immunity towards COVID-19, but would help the underlying problem of OSA as well. Losing weight while simultaneously treating sleep apnea can reduce daytime sleepiness, and getting good sleep is #1 immunity booster against all types of ailments and diseases. So take-home messages: education is the method of prevention of obesity-induced sleep apnea, as well as boosting up immune function. Like we saw that obese OSA patients have a discrepancy between what they actually ate and with what they perceived to have eaten in terms of nutritive value of their diet. Now, this discrepancy was due to lack of knowledge and awareness, and due to some misconceptions about certain food. So nutritionists and dietitians have an important role to play in nutrition education with the cooperation of other medical team of physicians and nurses, since an interdisciplinary approach to nutrition education would be vital as a preventive measure or to help the patients come out of COVID-19. It's important for healthcare providers to stress the idea of eat right, right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nancy. So I think the three speakers have given us a very good perspective, a different perspective on what to do with our OSA patient during this COVID-19 pandemic. So if you have any questions, please type into the Q&A for our panelists. But before that, I think we have some participants from Singapore. I think Sean, Dr. Sean Low, are you zoomed in?
He's here, Dr. Sangta. Should I promote him to a panelist?
Panelist, Dr. Ashwini?
Yeah, done.
Okay. Sure. Welcome, Dr. Sean.
Hi, Sean. Are you zoomed in?
Yeah, there we can see Sean. Yeah.
Oh, I can't see him.
No, he's there. He's there.
Okay. So while waiting for questions, maybe we'll get Sean to give just a brief update on what is happening in Singapore in terms of sleep apnea surgery practice in this COVID-19 pandemic. We know that in India, I think the practice is quite restricted because of this pandemic. But I think Singapore is a bit different. We're still allowed to do some sleep apnea surgery. Maybe Sean can share with the participants what is happening in Singapore. Sean is a consultant in the department of my department in the SGH, and is trained with Chang'e Memorial Hospital in sleep apnea surgery, especially the orthognathic skeletal surgery, and has published quite a few articles on it as well. So maybe Sean, you want to just share your experience in Singapore?
Welcome, Dr. Sean. You need to unmute yourself, Dr. Sean. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, yes. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, like the other speakers mentioned earlier, sleep apnea surgery over here is also considered non-essential. So during the early phase of COVID, when the numbers in Singapore were rising, we actually curtailed, or rather we stopped operating on OSA patients for about 2 to 3 months. Recently over here in Singapore, the community numbers have become under control, and we have started operating again. But we have quite a lot of precautions, a lot of them that have been detailed earlier already. But essentially, I think for DICE, we consider it quite a high risk procedure. So we do it, we still do it, but we limit the number of cases per session. Normally, we are fully gowned up with N95 masks, face shields, as well as disposable gowns. And during the sedation phase, I normally get the anesthetist to give some glycopyrrolate as well to reduce secretions. so that in whatever way we can, we try to reduce aerosol generation and secretion dispersal. As for surgery itself, we are doing nasal as well as pharyngeal surgery. We normally do it with N95 masks, face shields, as well as disposable gowns. We try to avoid aerosol generating procedures. We try to minimize using microdebriders. If we need to use microdebriders, some of us put on the powered air purifying respirators. But the problem with that is that when you use the powered air purifying respirators that cover your whole face, it makes it hard for you to use a headlight. So normally most of us still opt for the N95 and the face shield. We do have low profile respirators which only cover the bottom of your mouth. They are connected to a power unit behind your neck. But those units are expensive and harder to come by. So I think in general, we started operating again, but with precautions and while limiting our numbers. Post-op, using CPAP for patients is still an issue because these patients require CPAP post-op. So in those patients that require this kind of post-op care, we keep them in individual rooms to prevent dispersal of droplets that will affect other patients. Yeah, I think that's all I have to add.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Do we have any questions from the participants? No? Maybe I'll just start asking the panelists. Sorry, Sandeep?
Yeah, we do have questions from the
okay.
Okay. Before we start, I would like to request Dr. Ashwini. There is one poll question left. Can we have that also?
Sure.
We can have that also.
A very interesting question, yeah.
Very interesting question.
So for our Singapore doctors, I'm not sure if you all understand what desi ghee is. It is when butter is boiled. I think Dr. Nancy should give you an idea about it. Dr. Nancy, please. Request all other audience to please vote.
Yeah, this is actually when the butter.
Let's see the response first.
Okay.
We have 40% who have voted. I'll just wait for another 2 seconds and I'll end the polling. I think this should be enough. Sure. I hope you're able to see the results.
Yes. So, Dr. Sani, please, if you can.
Yeah, actually, this is not.
No.
Yeah.
There's a catch in this question, I know.
Yeah. All the fats approximately, all the oils and fats, they have approximately the same amount of calories. So this is a myth which was there in all the patients, obese patients, that yes, when they're using refined oils or olive oils, they can go rampant because, it is very light and very nice. It is not animal fat and, you will not absorb calories. And so, they were frying things in olive oil and refined oil and having it, and considering it that they are not having enough things, I mean, to be overweight. So basically the calories are same in
Thank
both.
you. Yeah. Thank you so much. So
a bad myth to be broken, if I may say.
The question is wrong.
There was a catch in this question that everybody would say olive oil actually. Otherwise you would have got the answer, Okay. Dr. Sagar, there is a question from Dr. Lavan Kumar for you. How to manage severe OSA with COVID in your practice? It's a very vast question, I agree, but just maybe if you can.
Yeah. So you mean to say that the patient is an adult patient or a pediatric patient?
He's talking about an adult patient.
Adult
because
patient.
It's a separate question for a pediatric.
Adult patient with COVID positive, right?
Yeah. Like
so,
what I think what he means to ask is surgery, conservative, CPAP, like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I would go for a conservative, especially a CPAP in this kind of scenario. When the patient is positive for COVID, I would go for a CPAP if the patient is severe. If the patient is I need to see the patient's history in a lot. You know, I need to know about the profile. What is the BMI? What is the? I need to do a proper evaluation whether there is a static obstruction or a dynamic obstruction. All
But
needs to be done.
basically, you would like
Basically,
to
be going towards CPAP.
lifestyle modification and CPAP. That's what
Yes.
you mean. Okay. Another thing is, what is your protocol for pediatric OSA patients during
Yeah.
COVID?
That is a very good question. See, when it comes to the pediatric OSA, surgery plays number one role
Exactly,
in contrary to adult OSA where CPAP plays the number one role. In pediatric OSA, I would definitely, is this the continuation of the same question? Is the pediatric
No,
patient
this
is
is a
also
separate
COVID positive or no? Okay.
Separate question.
No. If it is a separate question, then I think it is a very good question. Here, I would do as I had told in my talk. I would do as per the protocol. I will follow up. I'll do all the preliminary investigations and just a second. I will do all the preliminary investigations and I will look for enlargement of adenoids or tonsils, which is more commoner in pediatric age group. And if it is the cause, I would try medical management first. And if it is not subsiding, then I would go for the surgical protocol because we cannot give that much of a CPAP on a pediatric child. Again, it also depends on the age of the child and whether it is a neonate or infant. Then I would also need to see whether it is a laryngomalacia.
Broadly, you mean to say surgery is the choice.
Yeah.
Dr. Laman, I think when you attend the next webinar on next Thursday, same time, like we would all these things would be much more clearer in that because we'll be even discussing a case study on that thing. So this would be basically about surgical management, busting myths, and this case study would make things much more clearer. The management difference between pediatric OSA and adult OSA.
It was a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Songtar, do you have any questions for the panelists?
I do have some question for the panelists. Maybe I'll start with Vijaya. So you mentioned that, the sleep lab needs to be left vacant for 72 hours. Am I right? After each patient is used. But how do you all sterilize the setup to ensure that it's really COVID free or rather of contaminants?
As per the guidelines, even if you leave without doing anything, the corona will die off within 72 hours and to maximum of 7 days. So with the fumigation, we can do hypochlorous solution. Hypochlorous solution can also be used for fumigating the room. And as I told you, all the equipments, whichever we have used, has to be properly cleaned. And even if it is cleaned to the maximum protection and the safety, we are trying to keep it for 72 hours without using it. So if you have 2 to 3 labs in your center, it will be more comfortable doing one study per day instead of doing 3 or 4 studies per day, and do one study with one lab and use the same lab after proper disinfection. Use it on the 4th day, so that you won't miss any days without a machine. At the same time, we are making sure that the instrument is properly disinfected.
Okay, thank you, Vijaya.
Yep.
Any thing that you want to add, Srinivas, in your practice? Anything?
PPE and the mask and everything, and he just delivers the machine and waits outside. The guy hooks it on himself with the video call to the technician. If there is a problem in hooking it up, then he actually enters the house and then goes ahead and does it for him. But if not, on a video call, it's clearly done. He sets it up, he goes back. Next day morning, the patient just leaves it out at the doorstep and it's collected, and that makes it a very no-touch technique kind of a thing, like the Swiggy deliveries, contactless Swiggy deliveries and the contactless Dunzo deliveries. So I think all of you can try that, individualize this, and it will help you do a lot of your sleep studies there itself.
We have already
Sagar, you
done
had a
like the
question?
same thing. We are doing the same thing here. The only difference is we are able to do it only for the level 3, not for the level 2.
Level
Level
3.
3, a lot of cooking. It's
Yeah.
not possible for the patients to do it.
Absolutely. Only level 3 I'm
Exactly.
talking.
For the level 3, we are doing the same. What you?
Okay. Sagar, did you have you had a question?
Yeah, I think Dr. Nancy answered it already. So
Okay. Okay. Fine. I have just one more question before I finish with the questions from the participants, and then if Dr. Songtar has something. Another question was that again to Dr. Nancy, that what is the effect of sleep on appetite? Like, if the patient is able to sleep better, would there be help in reducing the weight, or vice versa, or something of that sort?
Definitely, because when the body is sleep deprived, the level of ghrelin spikes up. So while a level of leptin falls, so leading to an increase in appetite. When the body has full sleep, so it will be vice versa, definitely. So it really helps. Sleep really helps in controlling the appetite.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Maybe any of the panelists can take up this question. Would CPAP help in getting better exercise tolerance, or maybe to the exercise, something like that? Maybe who would like to take up this question? Vijay?
Songtar.
Songtar, okay.
Well, I mean, the exercise tolerance, I'm not so sure. Again, I don't think I've read any study on that. But I mean, if the patient has sleep apnea, he's sleepy, and if they become more energetic or more refreshed, their sleep is better. And generally, my patient do feel that they can have more time and energy to go out exercising. So that is based on clinical feedback from patients, but I don't remember any study specifically looking at exercise tolerance itself. The other thing that's quite interesting that one of my patients, sleep apnea, started CPAP, and previously I think she's a diver, so they're quite obsessive with regards to the amount of oxygen that they use, and she felt back, once she started CPAP, it seems like the amount of oxygen that she requires for each dive is less, and hence she's able to dive longer. But that's anecdotal experience for that particular patient for diving. But I would say that in general, my patient do say that, well, they are more energetic and able to go out and exercise once apnea is taken care of. Vijaya?
Yeah, true. One more question by Vidyasagar D from Hyderabad. So he's asking and suggesting, actually, why don't we try WatchPad instead of level 3 PSU, where there is a nasal cannula and which we can avoid. Yeah, that's a very good suggestion, and those who have a WatchPad, they can use it. Only thing with that is the reusable pulse oximeter probe. So if you compare the cost of the nasal cannula and a reusable pulse oximeter, this is much cheaper. But if you have a WatchPad, that definitely reduces the chance of infection. As I told you, the recommendation is if you are using a sleep lab, use the same sleep lab for different patient after 3 days. That reduces the chance of cross infection.
We have a few minutes left. Last two questions, I think. One is again from Dr. Alfaz. Vijay, you take this question. Would the condition of the bed or the comfort of the bed make a difference he's asking that, except the corporate hospitals, the other government hospitals might not be having such cozy beds.
Yeah. So definitely, see, there is even the different environment and everything makes a difference. So there is a first night effect during for the sleep study, and that you can't. So that always you have to correlate clinically, and when you are assessing the patient, you think this patient may be having a severe OSA, and the sleep study report says very mild OSA, then you may have to repeat it, or you may have to do it at his better field environment. But the result itself is showing already a severe OSA. And even though patient says, I didn't sleep, it was very uncomfortable. So, but your result VHA shows 60, 70, it is showing severe OSA and severe desaturations already. And it is a diagnosed case of severe OSA. We can proceed with the. So definitely the comfort and the environment plays a role in sleep studies.
Okay. Now, I would like to end from my side with one hilarious question. One of the participants is asking Dr. Nancy, which oil do you use at your home, please? You need to answer that.
I use all the oils actually. I use this clarified butter that is called Desi ghee, and even mustard oil, as well as refined oil. And we keep on changing the refined oil. Sometimes it is rice bran, sometimes it is soya, sometimes sunflower. One needs to keep on changing after every 2 to 3 months. So this is the way. I mean, it is there. 1:1:1 ratio, for example, of all the oils daily.
Dr. Songtar, if you could please wind up. I think it's almost 8:30 now.
So I think it has been a very fruitful discussion. I mean, it's exceptionally challenging times for everybody. I mean, not just in Singapore, I think in India as well. I mean, over here, when we watch the numbers going up and the death going up, I think we are very concerned. I think there's still the patient that needs to be served. The OSA patient needs to be treated, and I'm glad that our panelists has given us most of the information that is required for us to assess the patient, do a sleep study, as well as safety tips on how to look after all these patients in these challenging times. So again, thank you, Vijaya, Sega, and Dr. Nancy, and of course all the panelists for joining us, and the participants for joining us this evening. And I think maybe Sunday we want to advertise the next webinar again. That's chaired by Dr. Batista and Vijaya.
Yeah. So this would be next Thursday, same time, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And we'll have Dr. Rahul Modi, Dr. Sejal from the Department of Pulmonary Medicine, PGI Chandigarh, Dr. Srinivas Kishore, Dr. Dipankar Datta, giving their talks. And I would be discussing one case study, very interesting case study in the next session. And I hope Dr. Baptista can join us for that session. And thank you so much, Dr. Songtar, for sparing your valuable time in spite of your busy schedule for COVID in SGH. It was really, a very kind gesture on your part. Does any panelist wants to say
Thank
anything?
you very much, Sandy. Thank you for organizing this.
Just want to thank Songtar. It's really late for him. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Songtar.
No,
it's 11 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock at night.
Exactly.
Thank you.
On a weekday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the faculty and the attendees. This was a great experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ashwini.
Thank
the
you so
whole
much,
RESPECT team, Mr. Bhupinderji. Thank you so much for all the support provided. So see you next Friday, 6:30 p.m.
Same time, same link.
September.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.